The National Inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls heard from nearly 1,500 witnesses over the course of 3 years, and it found Indigenous women are 16 times more likely to be killed or to disappear than white women. The final report came out 2 years ago, but the government's response did not come out until today.
I was so upset when Justin Trudeau said that he had to push the report aside, what was it, last year, because of the pandemic, because of COVID. But it's like, okay, but we're in our own emergency right now. How come we're being pushed aside? We have been dealing with this for so long.
So does the plan put out today by the federal government address the inquiry's 231 calls for justice? Marion Buller was the chief commissioner of that national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and she is in Vancouver. Judge Buller, thank you very much for joining us on the program. We certainly appreciate it.
My pleasure, David. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you. I would like to just get your thoughts on this national action plan. And there is certainly some detail, but some critics of it say that it doesn't go far enough and they would have liked to see actual timelines attached. I want to get your sense of this response.
I was expecting that the federal government would almost literally leap into action on July 4th, 2019, because the momentum was there. Certainly the political statements were there for immediate action. It didn't happen. I don't know what the excuse is for the time period from June 4th, 2019 to the beginning of the COVID crisis, but nonetheless, nothing happened. In the meantime, in the last 2 years, Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit people have gone missing, and they've been murdered. And there are still mysteries surrounding several people all across Canada. So I'm not happy about the delay. The document itself is a restatement of the principles that we developed and wrote about in our final report, Reclaiming Power in Place. You're quite correct, and other speakers perhaps have gone into more detail about the lack of timelines and the lack of budgeting, for example. I know that the government, in its own part of the report or the plan, set out a timeline for an implementation plan, which is a separate step entirely. So I'm kind of at the point, well, look, the real people, the ones who can properly judge whether the National Action Plan is satisfactory, are the families and survivors, the people who all across Canada have been waiting for something to happen. I trust them. And if they're happy, I'm happy.
So then the question is, are they happy?
That I can't tell you. I can't speak for them.
Mm. And happy is, of course, a relative term when you're talking about your mothers and your sisters and your daughters disappearing, being murdered.
Of course it is. Yes.
There are a number of groups, Judge. The Native Women's Association of Canada left out of the process, releasing its own plan. I know you commented on that plan, saw a promise in it. Union of BC Chiefs saying it falls, that the plan presented by the federal government falls painfully short. I wonder what the areas that you feel the government could and should have acted on sooner than today, effectively 2 years after your own report came out.
Thank you, David. There are a number of areas that the federal government in particular, because it's not just federal government, it's provincial and territorial as well. Mm-hmm. But the federal government could have moved immediately to the Deputy Commissioner for Corrections Canada, for the Indigenous part of Corrections Canada, the ombudsperson for Indigenous and human rights in Canada, and the tribunal. That could have been done. It could have been up and running by now. A lot of the other changes, the law reform that we called for, the national standards for GLADU reports, for example, could have been done by now. Legislative changes on the part of the provinces and territories for Indigenous policing to be properly resourced and properly accredited, that could have been done by now. There are a lot of things that could have, and probably should have been done almost immediately, June 4th, 2019.
I hear you when you're saying that what you look to is the families who've been directly affected by this. But I wonder if you feel that the federal government has let down those families.
You'll have to ask that question of the families, David. They're the ones who
Do you feel let down?
Me personally, no, because I don't have much faith in government.
Now that is a curious thing to hear from you, Judge. And I think I understand where it's coming from. And when you look at the historical record, what are people to take of that you didn't, you don't have faith in government and what now we're relying on government, at least in part, to solve this horrifying issue?
Well, look at history. Look at the history of Canada as a state. Look at what we're reading and seeing in the news right now. What reason does any Indigenous person in Canada have to trust the government?
Why did you want to get involved in this? I think you know why I'm asking. It's curious to hear, I think absolutely it was critical that someone address this and put it all on the record. And you did that along with many others who worked on this. But if I'm curious about where we're left here, Judge.
Okay, where are we left? Well, let's go back in time a little bit. I thought that the work of the National Inquiry had to be done. Mm-hmm. It was critical work that had to be done, and I willingly stepped up to do it. I have no regrets. Through the families and survivors who testified at our hearings, we rewrote Canadian history and uncovered a lot of very, very heart-wrenching parts of Canadian history, very dark parts of Canadian history. And so I'm glad that those truths have come out, and now people are accepting our finding of genocide against Indigenous people in Canada. This is critical work that had to be done. I'm glad that we all of us, because there was a large group, did this work. I'm proud of the work that we did do, and I think it's important for all Canadians to know the real history of Canada.
Judge, I want to ask you, and it'll be the last question I ask you. There are obviously some very complex issues here. You speak about corrections, the vast overrepresentation of Indigenous people in our prisons, including Indigenous women relative to their size in the population. Many, many issues that are here at play. But on the issue of what prompted all of this, women, Indigenous women, disappearing, being killed, police not taking it seriously, murders still to this day unsolved. Do you feel we are any further ahead now than we were when you began this exercise?
I believe that we are further ahead than when we started the National Inquiry back in 2016, because look at the conversations we're having now. We're talking about thousands of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and 2S people. We weren't talking about that before. We were not talking about police indifference. We were not talking about over-incarceration of Indigenous women and girls and 2S people on a national level, and now on an international level. So we're having a conversation that we never had before, and that's a step forward.
Judge Buller, so good of you to give us some of your time this afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.